I spent over 1 year procrastinating on learning something that took me 1 hour to learn. I delayed learning something for an entire year, and when I actually sat down and tried to learn it, it took me 1 hour. One single hour, and yet I delayed it for over a year. Isn't that crazy? And yet this happens all the time. It's something that is more common than you think. Maybe not as big of a time scale as a year, but still, your brain over exaggerates how hard something will be. That's a big part of why people procrastinate as well, is that your brain doesn't want to expend energy. It wants you to just have a full belly, drink water, have all your biological needs met, and then lay on a couch and use as little energy as possible. For your biological needs, that's all your brain wants. And of course, no one wants to live like that, but yet your brain doesn't want you to expend energy. It doesn't want you to try and do something, especially something that it thinks it's hard. But procrastination makes it so that something that you need to do feels hard. So it tricks your brain into thinking that something is really hard, and your brain doesn't want to do hard things, and so you end up not doing it. I literally sat down and learned how to connect like a microphone and my phone into my computer to edit them together. I actually figured out how to use a microphone for the first time in a year. And the installation of the editor took longer than actually learning the thing itself. It took me 10 minutes to learn. I just searched up a tutorial real quick, and that was it. The installation took longer than the actual tutorial, and yet I delayed it for over a year. And so if you ever feel yourself experiencing that, something's too hard, you don't want to do it, I want you to remember my example. That I thought it was so hard, it was going to be a big task. I would have to dedicate at least a whole day, probably a week. And when I actually tried to do it, it took me less than an hour. I want you to remember that, because your brain comes up with all sorts of trickery, especially the part of your brain that procrastinates. It comes up with all kinds of tricks and schemes to try to get you to not do what you need to do. I want you to remember this, because this is such an important lesson for me. I figured out now that I shouldn't listen to what my brain thinks is hard at all, because it's always going to be messed with by procrastination. It's always going to be messed up. It's always going to be slightly off. It's going to be exaggerated. And because it's exaggerated, I'm not going to want to do it. But because it feels hard, that's what I need to do. And I hope that you remember this lesson, because I honestly wish that I could go back in time and tell myself to just learn a microphone, dummy. It only takes an hour, even less. I wish I could go back and tell myself that. I hope you take this lesson and think about how you can see what looks hard isn't actually as hard as you think.